If you haven't heard already, Bungie Studios, the creators of Halo and the Destiny series, are working on a new game called Marathon. We did a video on the game a few months back that in one part was a love letter to Bungie. Let me be honest, it's a studio that's created some of the most important and impactful games in my life. And in another part, it was kind of a plea, maybe to a Bungie long gone, to do right by their players and their fans in the making of their next game. Well, we couldn't have chosen a worse time to release that video. Since then, we have seen a lackluster expansion, employee layoffs, and most recently, a damning report from IGN on the situation from inside the studio. Bungie has made a series of decisions that have many wondering whether the Bungie Studios of 2024, 30 years after the studio's inception, will even exist long enough to finish their next game. Today, we're looking at how the decisions of a company in turmoil raise major questions about the future and the legacy of Bungie Studios, the Destiny series, and of Marathon. I'm Max Neal, and this is Voxel. But first, if you're a Destiny 2 player, I have to ask, are you okay? And if not, and you need somebody to speak to, this video is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp is an online therapy platform designed to get you connected to a licensed therapist who you can talk to about pretty much anything. Now, this is Voxel's first sponsor, and I chose them very specifically because I've used BetterHelp in the past for several months, and it honestly changed the direction of my life. It is the reason that I am sitting here in front of this camera making Voxel in the first place. I was originally matched with a therapist that I didn't really connect with, but therapy is not something that happens, it is a process, and BetterHelp understands this. So at the click of a button, I was able to switch my therapist to somebody who just meshed better with the way that I think about the world. And over the course of the next few weeks, we worked through together a lot of the insecurities and difficulties that I was facing. Through the course of this conversation, I wrote our first video on Voxel, and it was really the motion that I needed in my life to push forward. Licensed therapists on BetterHelp are trained to help you work through issues that are going on in your life. So if you're somebody who is struggling, or you just need to talk something out with somebody who is trained to listen and help you work through it, go take a look at BetterHelp. There's a link down in the description and in the pinned comment down below. Anyway, on to the video. In the era of the Halo trilogy many years ago, Bungie was at times seen as a studio that could do no wrong. They'd created a gaming icon, a series, and a character that became a household name across the world. Even my mom remembers. Okay, I'll show you a photo. Do you remember the main character in Halo?
Transformer guy, I don't know.
Transformer guy?
I don't know.
Master
Eliminator?
Master Eliminator, that's what it was.
Was it?
No, it wasn't. I remember Bungie when the discussion around games wasn't just how many people got laid off at Bungie this year, and instead we were talking about, whether Master Chief was going to make out with Cortana by the end of the series. That's not the Bungie we know today. Lately, Bungie's been in the crosshairs for a series of decisions that were entirely avoidable. Let's start with the release of Destiny 2's most infamous expansion, Lightfall, which was raked through the mud by players for its disappointing writing, its lack of meaningful gameplay content, and a feeling that it kinda lacked the heart and soul of the Destiny series at all. Fans were quick to express their frustration and disappointment with the game, especially during a point of the story that should have felt so important, but fell so terribly flat. The game's gotten a bit better since then, although that's arguable, but it's raised the question of whether Bungie can bring the saga of the final shape, perhaps the saga of Destiny 2 in its entirety, to a fulfilling conclusion. And is that even enough to save Bungie? Destiny's player base has been shrinking, sales have been declining, and that puts Bungie in the vulnerable financial position that could threaten the future of the entire studio. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that's probably what's led to Destiny 2's reputation as a total cash grab. On our last video on Marathon, a lot of your comments were focused on frustration with Destiny 2's monetization model. Destiny expansions cost $40 to $50, and on top of that, you have to pay extra for seasonal battle passes if you want access to the latest cosmetics, and there are cosmetic items that are only obtainable in the cash shop that can cost up to $30. Before the "it's just cosmetics" crowd chirps up, everyone plays games for different reasons, and to me, someone who really enjoys new gear and just kind of looking cool in games, it feels like Destiny 2's monetization structure takes advantage of its biggest fans through continuous microtransactions on top of the costs to play the game's latest content. This sentiment is shared by many of you, inside and outside of the Destiny community, and it's one of the major sources of distrust towards Bungie's Marathon. Just look at the comments on our video. People are fed up with live service games, and for the studio whose acquisition by Sony was rumored to be in large part due to its success in creating a live service experience, a studio that has shown several times that monetization takes priority over a well-crafted game, it's no wonder that the players who should be Bungie's biggest fans are skeptical about the studio's future. It's hard to quantify the full public opinion of these kinds of things, and platforms like Reddit and YouTube tend to amplify the angriest comments, the angriest creators, and create bubbles within these communities that are often overly critical. The rumors surrounding Sony's acquisition of Bungie, and man, if you think about it, Bungie has really been passed around by Microsoft and Sony over the years. Maybe we need Nintendo to give them a turn. Anyway, rumors surrounding Sony's acquisition of Bungie were that Sony wanted a leg in the live service space, and who better to lead the way than the pioneers of the genre. But as sentiment toward live service has taken a nosedive recently, it almost feels as if Sony has taken a step back from its ambitions in delaying the release of many of its planned live service titles. This could mean anything, and there's not a lot of use to speculate on why it's happening. Delays happen a lot with games, but I can't help but feel that Marathon might be in jeopardy. A live service game created in an era where live service games are dying every day. Following the Lightfall expansion, Bungie laid off around 100 employees across the Destiny 2, Marathon, and internal teams, including possibly one of Bungie's greatest assets, Michael Salvatore, who is one of Bungie's in-house composers behind the Halo and Destiny soundtracks that we know and love. News of the layoffs rocked not only the Destiny community right on the back of what may have been Destiny's worst received expansion of all time, but also the gaming community at large that is tackling over 6,000 jobs that have been lost this year alone. And sorry, but that's just f***ed up. Those affected by the Bungie layoffs were passionate about making games. Some even moved to Seattle to join the team, only to be discarded by a studio that seemingly doesn't care about them. Alana Pierce made a video about the layoffs when the news broke and shared a really important point about this layoff decision.
The passion that goes into game development, to have that just be discarded as though it is valueless, I guess because it is to a corporation, is just so uniquely brutal. Anyone with any skill that would qualify them to work at a AAA studio like Bungie could make more money doing something else, working for a different company with that same skill set. You work in games because you love games. You put in long hours because you love making games and you love your team and you love the community. And so for the companies to turn around, which of course they do, I get it. Like, it's not realistic to assume that because you love your job that you get to keep it, but that doesn't make it any less heartbreaking.
We'll include a link to Alana's full video in the description below, but there have been a lot of signs recently pointing to the end of Destiny 2, something that we know will come eventually. But it raises the big question about Marathon, a game that's been in development since 2019 and whose release date was recently pushed back to 2025, delayed along with half of Sony's live service titles in development. Most recently, in an article by Rebecca Valentine at IGN, several Bungie employees came forward to speak anonymously about what it's like to work at the studio now, and it's not looking good. Along with the layoffs, Bungie has cut, delayed, or paused many other employee benefits, including holiday bonuses, the frequency of team events, employee compensation adjustments, even its peer recognition program. One source reported that the mood within the company has been, quote, soul-crushing. In another quote, there's a feeling of us versus them between Bungie's leadership and workers. That trust has been eroded since the layoffs, which is understandable when at any moment you could be the next one to go. Working in an environment like this is really depressing. And in an industry where games can flop in even the best of circumstances, imagine how challenging it would be to create a hit that might save your studio. It's not unheard of. Obsidian Entertainment made Fallout New Vegas in 18 months under incredible pressure for the game to perform, and infamously, it fell 1 Metacritic percentage point short of earning its studio's performance bonus, which led to Obsidian canceling its planned RPG Stormlands before it could be finished, and oh god, that could happen to Marathon. Or worse. See, while Bungie is still an independent subsidiary of Sony, its board of directors is now split between Sony and Bungie leadership. And IGN sources claim that if Bungie fails to meet certain financial thresholds, then Sony is allowed to dissolve Bungie's board of directors and take full control of the studio. So no pressure on the team or anything. This puts the Bungie Layoffs, Destiny's hyper-monetization, and the delay of its next expansion, The Final Shape, under a new light. This isn't a company that's simply greedily grasping for more cash to line its coffers. It's a company grasping to stay in control of itself, one that needs its next release to be a success to prevent potentially being absorbed by its new owners. This doesn't absolve Bungie's leadership of the decisions that led to this point. It doesn't forgive the lackluster nature of Lightfall's release. It does answer some of the questions about why Destiny is the way that it is, but it doesn't repair the relationships lost between Bungie and its former fans. Relationships that Bungie needs to rebuild if it's going to survive. This breakdown of trust between the studio and players might be one of the biggest threats to the success of Marathon. There is a growing cynicism in gaming derived from the insistence of corporate AAA studios like Activision and Bungie on milking players year after year, season after season, for content that, let's be honest, should be included in the game. Live service has kind of become a slur to describe games created for the sheer purpose of increasing corporate profits. And what a lot of studios don't realize, or maybe they just don't care about, is that these decisions are changing the landscape and the social contract between players and game makers. I've noticed recently that conversations around games are starting to get really nasty. A growing number of you feel disrespected by an industry that takes advantage of your very own psychology. FOMO-inducing pre-order bonuses for games that release half-baked, battle passes and cash shops that offer items that should be included in a paid game. And from the perspective of inside the industry, passionate employees that put in long hours and unpaid overtime for the work they love, who are discarded at the flick of a wrist. It's leading a lot of players to frustration or disappointment in their favorite series or in gaming as a whole. And that is manifesting itself in gaming's most passionate players as brutal cynicism and angry comments like this one we got aimed at us. Criticism is nothing new to the games industry, but this kind of cynical and over-negative discourse is having a greater impact on the environment in which games are being made. This isn't to say that constructive criticism doesn't have a place in making games. Everyone would agree that it does, but a lot of the discourse around games is anything but constructive. Putting your heart and soul into a creative project, the way that our favorite creators of games do, relies on a sort of perceived impossibility of criticism, or at least an acceptance that criticism will be inevitable. Voxel's best videos, I think, are the ones where I can sit down and write freely without worrying about what people might think of them, without having to write the 1,000 asterisks over every sentence to describe the nuance and my real meaning behind everything I have to say. Maybe that's kind of what this video is. But now imagine the position of a Marathon game designer at Bungie, tasked with following up Destiny 2, a 6-year mega epic of a series, faced with reading hundreds of comments from disgruntled D2 players that read like this. Some might argue that the studio needs a wake-up call, that nothing is ever going to change unless we speak up about it, and there is a lot of truth to that. If the way we spoke to Bungie didn't look like that. It's not surprising that it feels like Bungie isn't listening at times. They are, but in times when the discourse gets most heated, corporate studios like Bungie tend to put up walls between angry outbursts and the most important employees, the designers and the developers of their games. Maybe that's why it feels like players and creators are becoming even more distant in the gaming industry. More than ever in AAA gaming, we're left communicating with faceless Twitter accounts and community managers and corporate press statements that feel wildly out of touch with the sentiment of players. Maybe we're creating a bit of that corporatization ourselves through the way that we talk to game developers. And this is a cyclical effect. Bungie, through their decisions, creates an environment of distrust and cynicism among their fans. Then fans, feeling disenfranchised with the franchise, express their frustration and disappointment with the studio and the state of the game, which leads Bungie to make decisions that potentially further frustrate the community, and the cycle continues back and forth. This is something that's very difficult to break, something that I think deserves its own separate video, but what's undeniable is that it creates an environment that is suffocating to creativity. In an atmosphere like this, where the team creating Marathon needs to fight a war on two fronts, one against the corporatization of its game, and one against the outrage and frustration from fans, how could a new game under Bungie ever possibly be good? My naive hope is that Marathon might be made as a traditional multiplayer game with innovative mechanics, but without the pressure put on games like Destiny 2 to constantly be churning out expensive, profit-driven content. Just give us a game that is fun to play, something with a hook that keeps us coming back match after match, and without the obnoxious over-monetization of its predecessor. I think that's all anybody wants. Given how fragile live service games have proven to be lately, Marathon as a live service might make it more of a risk than Marathon as a traditional multiplayer game. Of course, in the eyes of Sony, it may just be that it is a quick cash cow that they're looking to cash out on. I hope that isn't the case, but really, we don't know. All of this adds up to a big uncertainty about Marathon. How can a game designed as a live service succeed in a culture that is growingly, increasingly fed up with the model? How can a company that is burning so much goodwill with its fans, its employees, and its own industry be trusted to put out something that's worth playing? And can the talented and creative people working on Marathon overcome the pressures and expectations surrounding a $3.6 billion acquisition? Marathon is being developed in an atmosphere of growing turbulence. Turbulence between players and game makers, turbulence between game makers and their employers, turbulence between the status quo and new thinking. And it could prove to be too much for the title. Or, the game could be great, what do I know? I'll see you in the comments.